So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the White House. Never get told saying that. My name is Elias Alcantara, and I am Associate Director of Intergovernmental Affairs, and I will be your MC for the afternoon. Before we get started, I just wanted to share some logistical and housekeeping rules, as you may imagine. One, if folks need to kind of step out for a call or use the restroom, please make sure to coordinate with one of our awesome interns. Please raise your hand. We got a few here. There'll be a few coming in later. Two, today's briefing is actually being live streamed, so folks across the nation can join and be part of this important discussion. So everyone say hi to friends at their homes and their offices. Hi, everyone. Lastly, feel free to tweet about your visit today by using hashtag criminal justice reform that you'll see right here on the screen and the two screens here on the side. I would like to thank everyone for being here today again. We have a great group of folks in the crowd today, from senior administration officials to staff from offices across the building and the administration, from public engagement and intergovernmental affairs, domestic policy council, Department of Justice colleagues, from the Office of Deputy Attorney General, justice programs, Bureau of Prisons. I mean, the list is long, and I just name a few to show you the widespread support and really focus on this issue, not only here at the White House, but across the administration. We have advocates, academics, private sector partners, and even recording audiences in the audience today. Let's give a hand to MC Hammer and John Forte. And John Forte, it's pretty cool. Got some cool partners on this very, very important issue. And really the main reason why we're here today, we have a number of commutation recipients from across the country that have received clemency from this administration and previous administrations. And if you don't mind, if the commutation recipients could please stand up so we could acknowledge you all, because you're the main reason why we're all here today. This briefing will cover efforts to make our criminal justice system more fair. So this is really building on the president's announcement yesterday. How could I forget that line? As many of you know, he commuted 61 folks yesterday and had an impromptu lunch with a few of you that are here today. This briefing will cover efforts to make our criminal justice system more fair by granting clemency to men and women sentenced under outdated sentencing rules. Today's briefing will provide a collaborative environment to discuss and share ideas on the president's clemency efforts and ways to improve paths to reentry for these individuals. This is not an opportunity to discuss individual cases, as we are not legally allowed to discuss those issues today. It is clear that we all know that there are a lot of challenges that exist in this space, but there are also a ton of opportunities, and many of you here in the audience represent just that. We are excited to create this space to have this discussion today, and excited for the new ideas and partnerships that will come out of today's discussion. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Neil Eggleston is the White House counsel, and his office manages the clemency process at the White House. He leads an amazing team of attorneys who are invested in this issue, and he is coming up to share a little bit more about this process and his work here at the White House. With that, our White House counsel, Neil Eggleston.
So what a great group. I recognize some of you from yesterday. It's really great to see you again. Welcome to the White House. It's just a complete pleasure to host all of you here. You know, for a number of you, probably not that many months ago, you would not have been able to imagine being sitting at the White House, put aside having lunch with the President of the United States yesterday. So welcome to all of you who are here. I'm here to welcome you, but also to talk with you about clemency. It's an issue of enormous importance to me. I spend a lot of time on it, but a lot more important than it's important to me, it's very important to the President of the United States. I talk to him about these issues regularly, what the standards should be, talk to him about individual cases, and he is very invested in the work that he is doing in this space. And I just also want to recognize Sally Yates, who is the Deputy Attorney General, who's sitting here in the front row. We work very closely with her office in connection with this. And she is also very committed to, and her office is committed to this initiative. And I just want to thank her for the partnership that we have with her in getting this job done. So as Ellis just said, yesterday the President commuted 61 more federal sentences. Most of these individuals were serving significant periods of time in prison under outdated and unduly harsh sentencing laws, the type of sentences that overcrowd our prisons, burn through our tax dollars, and do not make us safer. Of particular significance to me, 21 of these individuals were serving life sentences. Altogether, the president's actions have saved 92 individuals from serving life sentences, who were serving life sentences, from spending the rest of their lives behind bars. Now look, don't get me wrong, I was an assistant United States attorney in the 80s, and like everybody in the federal system, I prosecuted drug cases and lots of other tough cases. You know, some people mess up and deserve some sort of punishment, and I don't dispute that, and most people don't dispute that. But in some cases, like the 61 yesterday and the 248 total the president has granted commutations to, the punishment far exceeds what is required by law. The punishment, required by law far exceeded the seriousness of the offense. These unduly harsh sentences are one of the reasons the president is committed to using all the tools that he has to remedy unfairness in our criminal justice system. Clemency is just one of the tools that he has to address individual instances of such unfairness. Obviously, our work on the Clemency Initiative is very much ongoing. I expect and commit to all of you that the president will continue to issue clemencies throughout the rest of his period of time in office. Through both, thanks. So both his words and his actions, he has made clear that he is committed to using clemency powers, frankly, in a ways not seen by any president during the modern era. Countless people in this room are helping with this effort. I want to talk for a minute about Clemency Project 2014. They have already helped hundreds of inmates apply for clemency. Just yesterday, 25 of the 61 clemency commutations that were granted to individuals who were represented by Clemency Project 2014. And I didn't recognize the shout until I did not recognize that Cynthia Rosenberry was here until I heard the shout. And so Cynthia is the executive director of Clemency Project 2014. And Cynthia, we just really thank you for the enormous work that you all are doing in this space. So they're still working hard. They're assigning out additional petitions. We're going to get a lot more petitions from them. I've learned during my time at the White House that anytime you do something, various people will criticize you for it. So we did 61 yesterday, and we got a fair amount of press from various people that we should have done more. We're going to do more, I assure all of you. But to all those law professors and various people who were critics yesterday, I just urge you to call Clemency Project 2014 and volunteer to take a petition. And get your students and get them to take petitions, because what the president needs is petitions to get to the Deputy Attorney General's office, the Office of Pardon Attorney, the Deputy Attorney General's office, over to my office, and so we can get them up to the president. So I just commend anybody watching or anybody in the room, if you really are committed to this, I just urge you, everybody needs to get a petition in, and we really need to get people to be committed to that. It's great to be a naysayer. Easy to be a naysayer. It's a lot easier. It's a lot more productive, though, to help and get a solution to this project, and I hope everybody out there will do that. So as you've heard, and I see some of them here in the front row, yesterday the president took the extraordinary step of having lunch with 7 individuals who received commutations from him, from President Bush, and from President George W. Bush, and from President Clinton. It was at a restaurant up on 14th Street called Busboys and Poets, great restaurant. I attended that lunch, and I just can't tell you how sort of warm and rewarding that was to the president, particularly, as well as to me. He said at the time and said to me afterwards that the lunch offered the opportunity to show the public what a second chance can look like. And we thank all of you for being examples of a second chance. He talked about one of the individuals, Phil Emmert, who's here. I saw him a minute ago. There's Phil. So Phil, as Ellie said, we're a little careful about individual stories, but since the president already talked about yours yesterday, I'm feeling free to do a little bit on you, so I appreciate it. Phil is a veteran of the United States Army. He was convicted of distributing meth and received a 27-year sentence. While incarcerated, he had a personal tragedy, which is that his wife was in a serious car accident and she was paralyzed. And so here he is in prison, and his wife is essentially paralyzed at home. Through really admirable strength, he worked through his time in incarceration. He obtained training in heating and air conditioning systems. He told the president yesterday that he knew when he came out he was going to have to get a job. And so he did everything he could to get a certificate in anything he could, so that when he came out, he could tell potential employers, not just I worked on various things, but I got certificates and I'm certified to work in various different areas. So he worked hard to learn the heating and air conditioning business. And when, after getting a commutation by President Bush, he found employment at the Veterans Administration, where he's been now employed for a number of years. As the president said, Philip is just one example of what we mean when we talk about second chances, and I congratulate you for that and the other people the president met with yesterday. You're such terrific second chance examples. I'm pleased that you'll hear from many of them today, as well as many others with very similar stories. Yesterday's lunch also reflected the administration's commitment to improve reentry and reintegration into society after incarceration. The president talked to many of you about very interesting ideas that were generated during the course of that lunch. One of the reasons I'm appreciative of everyone being here today is the opportunity to identify more ways in which the administration can work to clear barriers faced by those trying to adjust to life after incarceration. And I knew some before yesterday, and as a result of yesterday's lunch, I learned more of real barriers that the administration must be able to attack and tackle in order to make that transition easier for all of you. In a minute, I'm going to welcome Roy Austin to the stage, but before you come up, Roy, he's going to sort of lead a panel, but I want to talk to him about another area where Roy and I are collaborating. We've been working with the Stanford Justice Advocacy Project to provide additional reentry support for commutation recipients. Stanford is doing exceptional work in the reentry space by providing free services and basic essentials to commutation recipients immediately upon their release. Stanford has worked with 130 of the commutation recipients in 20 states and the District of Columbia. They're applying their very successful Ride Home program nationally, which Stanford developed as a result of the work it did on the unwinding of the California Three Strikes program some years ago. You're going to hear from individuals working with Stanford, including Carlos Cervantes, whom I think is sitting right here. And you'll also hear from Mike Romano, who's sitting next to him and next to Cynthia. Mike leads the Stanford team. He is doing wonderful work in support of the president. Stanford is one of the really outstanding groups that is assisting with this entire project in the reentry space. And I'm very appreciative of all they have decided to offer in support and their resources. So a number of people said to the president yesterday how much responsibility they feel on having been granted commutations, and how much they are now going to value the ability to show that they're valid second chances, so the president can continue in this really significant work. And I know I appreciated, and I know the president appreciated how much all of you and the others of you who are commutation recipients in the room have dedicated yourself to make sure that you act in a way that the president can continue with this program as he completely intends to do. So let me now welcome Roy and 4 other individuals: Ramona Brandt, Norman Brown, Rudolph Norris, and Shauna Berry Scott. They all received commutations from President Obama. We're all eager to hear your stories and your experiences, both your challenges and your joys. And so I welcome all of you, and I can't thank you all enough for being able and having the privilege of being able to talk to all of you today. Thank you very much, and you are all doing fantastic work.
Well, welcome everyone. I came prepared for this thing with some tissues because I've already spoken to all of these individuals, and each and every one of them deserves an hour on this stage individually to tell their stories. So we're going to try to move fast and really dig in as deep as we can in about 45 minutes. But let's start off with kind of just a kind of rapid introduction. If you could each just say your name, where you grew up, your age, and I'm sorry, ladies, if you don't want to, you don't have to. How many children you have and their names and ages, and where you live now. And we'll just do that just rapidly down the line. So, Ramona, if you want to start, go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Ramona Brandt. I grew up in Freeport, New York. That's Long Island. I am 53 years old. I'm sorry, 53 years old. And I'm happy to be 53. My sons, they are now 24 and 25 years old. They were 3 and 4 when I was incarcerated.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Norman Brown. I'm a resident of the District of Columbia. I have a daughter whose name is Kyla. She's 24 years old. I'm 48 years old. I served 24 and a half years in prison, and I currently live in the outskirts of Washington, D.C. in Maryland.
Rudolph?
Yeah. My name is Rudolph Norris, and I'm currently 58 years old, and I grew up in the city of Washington, D.C. myself, in Northwest. And I have 3 beautiful kids, Rudolph Jr., which is 40 years old, my daughter Regine, which is 34, and then my youngest son Raymond, which is 25 years old.
Okay. And Shauna?
I'm Shauna Berry Scott. In my earlier life, I lived in Toronto, Canada, and for the majority of my life, I lived in the Mahoning Valley in Ohio. That's right outside of Cleveland. And I have 5 children, 4 living. They're ranging in age now from 22 to age 30, and my deceased son would have been 35 this year. I'm 53 years old, and I guess that's it, right?
So, Shauna, tell me, how long were you incarcerated for?
I was incarcerated for almost 10 and a half years.
And what was your sentence?
My sentence was 20 years, mandatory minimum.
Okay. Rudolph, how long were you incarcerated for?
I was incarcerated for almost 22 years,
And what was your sentence?
360 months, which is 30 years.
Norman, I think you said, how long were you incarcerated for?
24 and a half years,
Out of a sentence of how long?
life without parole.
Okay. And Ramona?
21 years, sentenced life without parole.
Ramona, tell the audience about your relationship with your husband before you were incarcerated.
I was in a very abusive relationship with my children's father, and I decided I had enough, and I left. And upon my leaving, orders were to go and kill my brother, where they took my brother and beat him severely in front of his family. They made them watch. And then the next order was to go to New York and kill my mother. So I called and found out what was going on, and I returned back to him, to the relationship, to avoid any other family members being abused by him.
And let me ask, Norman, where was your mother when you were growing up?
My mother was in the house.
And was she in the house up until the time you were incarcerated?
Yes, she was, but I was on my own at the time of my incarceration, but my mother and father were still together.
And what was happening in your life around the time that you were incarcerated?
What was happening in my life was pretty much of me trying to figure out and trying to show my manhood. I think my concept of manhood was twisted. I thought that I was folding the peer pressure, because I was trying to establish myself based upon the things that I saw every day. So when by me trying to establish myself and maybe fit in as any typical young teenage person would do, I mimicked what I saw. And that was hanging out, trying to make fast money, date as many girls as you possibly can, and have fun. So that was really what was going on in my life at my time of my incarceration.
And how old were you when you were incarcerated?
22 years old.
Rudolph, tell me a little bit about your family as you were growing up before you were incarcerated.
Well, I grew up with a family of 8 brothers and sisters, and I came up during the time when we had the Martin Luther King ride and everything. And then, you know, like really, I was raised off of like sugar water, butter sandwiches, and stuff like that because my family had to struggle when I was coming up, and so you know. It was kind of rough. My mother and them did the best they could for us. You know, even at the age of me graduating from elementary school, I had to wear a thrift suit with hush puppy shoes. You know, and I was very embarrassed about it. But I knew that my mother was doing the best she could at that time. So that's what kind of, you know, persuaded me to be able to, you know, like to run the streets the way that I did because, you know, I vowed to take and try to do better for myself. I lost my mother at an early age when I was 15 years old. And so, you know, like then I had an older sister that I loved dearly. And she's the reason that I shouldn't be the person that I am today because the fact is she vowed that she wasn't going to lose a brother to the street, which her name is Sandra Simmons. And, you know, and I'm very thankful for that. And so, you know, I really didn't have a too much rough, but I made it rough. Like I heard Brother Norman say, you know, like I came addicted to the streets and to the lifestyle that was in the streets. And that's pretty much what I would have to say, you know. It's a lot more to it. Like you said, it would take a whole lifetime to be able to tell the story that I would have to tell.
How did it impact you to lose your mother when you were 15?
Well, it impacted me a lot because I took it out on my father. And, you know, and when I say that, because I blamed him and said if he would have been there for my mother because I lost my mother. I was working at the time, and I lost my mother because she had a seizure and said all it took was somebody to put a spoon in her mouth and, you know, like to stop her from trying to swallow her tongue, and he was saved. But he had a real bad drinking problem. And so, and then, you know, like my first thing was I accused him, and at 15, I jumped on him. You know, and then because my mother was my love. And, you know, she didn't see me as doing no wrong. And so, you know, she was my everything. If she would have been here through this incarcerating here, she would have been visiting me every day that I was in prison. That's how much her love and how strong she was. When I first went to receiving home when I was young, she stood out in front of the receiving home door and cried, and they had to end up calling the Superior Court judge. And they said, look, we letting you go because your mom won't leave the front of this building. And they let me go home. They let me go home and said, look, the only reason I'm letting you go because this woman here standing in front of our building wouldn't leave. And they let me go home that day, and I had to vow to promise to come back for Superior Court, which it was a minor offense. I was very bad at, you know, like attending school. I was just missing school a lot.
Shauna, you sold drugs, correct?
I did.
Why were you selling drugs?
Well, I can't say that I did it because of personal need. I was born into a situation where I was privileged and had most of everything I needed and a lot of the things that I wanted. And when I saw the people around me who were in the city that I lived in, which is Youngstown, at this time it was after the steel mills had collapsed and we lost most of our manufacturing base. We went through a really, really rough period. It was like the perfect storm of everything that could possibly be wrong. The manufacturing shut down, crack had hit, and people were really, really suffering, especially the kids. So I tried everything I could to raise enough money to do the community outreach work that I wanted to do, but it never was enough to keep up with the need. There always seemed to be more and more people that would come and need food and clothes. We used to do the kids' school clothes and Christmas toys and everything. So fortunately, instead of me using intelligence and hiring grant writers or whatever I needed to do for my organization, I tapped into the drug markets that already existed and raised the money that way. And it was always in my mind, I was determined that I was going to get through the next event, and then I was going to hire the grant writers. And this went on and on and on for many years until it finally resulted in me ending up in federal prison.
I'm going to direct this question to Ramona and Rudolph. I want to talk to you a little about what life in prison was like for you. Ramona, talk about it and talk about the programming that you did while you were in prison.
First of all, when you're sentenced to a word instead of a number, it's almost impossible to be accepted into the programs that are afforded in prison. Not that they're a lot, not that they're helpful, but you are put on the back burner. You're not even considered because you're not getting out of prison. So you get beat down not only by your peers, but you get beat down by the staff as well, because they're not going to give you that opportunity to get into the programs that they have. I never accepted the life sentence. I never believed that I would spend life in prison for the crime that they charged me for. So I was determined to get what I felt was mine. So I fought long, I fought hard to be accepted into the programs. I successfully completed the apprenticeship. I am a certified chaplain assistant in the state of Connecticut. I have a certificate in wedding consultant. I have college credits for business with legal application and many other minor certificates. The reentry process is a good process that they are now implementing within the prison, but there should always be room for someone that has not given up hope, and even for those that have. It's a struggle to be placed in these programs because they don't believe that you're going to be freed. They don't believe that our president will grant clemencies. They don't believe that a law will change and say, you know what, we're going to give you a second chance. You're not given a second chance in prison. You're there, you're job security for a lot of the officers, and that's all they see you as. That's my paycheck. So I wanted to prove them wrong, and I wanted them to show that not only can I do these programs and complete them successfully, that I would be on the other side of the wall one day.
Rudolph, tell the audience a little bit about the programming that you did while you were incarcerated.
Well, when I first started out, I became a cook at Lewisburg Penitentiary. And, I really enjoyed it until, I had a few friends who was telling me about this place called Unicorn. And so, and then I really wanted to stay in the kitchen because, in the kitchen, then, we had this thing where, you make guys plates and stuff, and they would pay you for making plates and stuff. So I really didn't want to go on the Unicorn. And so, but eventually, I ended up going to Unicorn, and then there was a metal finish program that I was involved in, where you make the metal cabinets that be inside these government institutions and stuff, or, the government businesses and stuff. We was making metal cabinets, file cabinets, lockers and stuff like that. And I learned how to be able to take and do that through machines that they had up there. Through the course of that, I ended up taking a vocational trade, which was submarine cables for the Army, for the Navy, and for the Air Force, where, they made telephone cables for that. So I went to school for that, and I'm a certified, cable technician as far as in the Labor Department. All I would have to do is go down and be recertified again in order for me to be able to take this trade. So upon that, they took and sent it to another institution, and I ended up getting into the print process. I took and went to vocational school for that and learned how to become a quality assurance inspector in both fields. And I went to school and I passed that, and I still can go to the Labor Department and be certified there. as a certified, quality assurance inspector there. And, and I tried to apply for the print company here, and they told me I was overqualified in the District of Columbia. And the one on New York Avenue and 8th Street. And so, I don't know what they're reading for not hiring me. But, I was trying to get advanced. Eventually, I got an opportunity to go to a print company out there in Hyattsville, Maryland, at KDF. And they gave me my first opportunity upon me first coming home. And, and I showed what, I was about. And they gave me the opportunity where we was printing T-shirts, whatever material you might wanted to do. And then, it was truly a blessing, but I didn't change jobs since then because they didn't really want to pay me what I was asking for. So now I work for, MDV, Nash Finch. I'm a forklift operated, machine operated driver, which I drive lifts, and it's been truly a blessing.
And the company that gave you your first chance was called what again?
KDF Printing.
And they knew you had been formerly incarcerated,
They
correct?
knew I've been formerly incarcerated.
Let's talk a little about family while you were in prison. Norman and Ramona, I'm going to ask you this question, but Norman, how much contact did you have with your family while you were incarcerated, and how did that impact you?
Oh, well, my family was very tight, very close. We were small, but we were very close. And to know that you have someone that loves you, that supports you, is enough in itself to make you want to become better. Because when you don't have anybody in your corner, when no one believes in you, when everybody has dropped you off a cliff, to know that you are loved and someone cares about you is very inspirational. And it makes you want to get up, and it makes you want to keep going. So therefore, my mother, my father, my sister, my brother while he was alive, because I lost my mother, father, brother, and grandmother while I was in. So, and it was all back to back. But by the time they left the scene, my mother had told me, she said, I can leave here knowing that that prison, that you have allowed prison to make you out of, I can be comfortable that you will be all right. So it's nothing like to be loved. When you loved and you cared for, that is what you need to keep going. Without that, you can give up if you're not strong. But my family was my backbone. All the way to now, my sister is the only one living of the siblings. And she has been remarkable, and she's here now.
Where is she?
She's right there.
Ramona, talk about your contact with your family while you were incarcerated.
Christmas was a special time. And every Christmas, my mother would, 3 carloads of people would come to the prison. And we would spend Christmas together. In 2004, she became sick, and when she died, it was one of the hardest moments of my life to think that this woman that had always been there for me was no longer there. Like your mother, one thing she told me, and it was hard to understand, she said, I am so proud of you, and you're gonna be all right. And that gave me the strength to persevere. She and my father, he passed in '96. And when he didn't recognize anyone, I would call home and he would say, baby, it's okay. You're coming home. He didn't recognize my mom, he didn't recognize my siblings, but he knew who I was on the phone. And he says, don't worry, you're coming home. So between both of my parents, they left me with a strength that I didn't know I had. My sons, they're there, they're supportive, nieces, nephews. I lost a brother in 13, and the rest of my siblings, they're there, they're extremely supportive. I'm home with my sons. Again, I said that they were 3 and 4 when I left. They did not have to open their arms to me. They did not have to embrace me. They could have walked away and said, you were not here for me. But they are there They are protective. They don't want a man near me.
Are they here right now?
No, they're not
okay.
here. Unfortunately for my sons, though, this is it's a bittersweet moment because it is their father that is my co-defendant, and it was difficult because they were raised hearing your parents are never coming home. You know, both of us were sentenced to life in prison. So it was a difficult time for my sons to be ridiculed by society for what their parents were dealing with. Guilty or not, my sons was on trial daily. My sons was convicted and sentenced daily. And now half of their sentence is over, and they're still struggling through the other part of the sentence because their father is still in prison. Right, wrong, or indifferent, whether I like him, love him, or not, that's their father, and they're still dealing with that. So they're happy, they're elated, I am there, but they're sad and disheartened because of the situation that they're still dealing with.
Norman and Shauna, tell me, or tell this audience, when you first learned that you received clemency, how did you find out, and what was that like? Shauna, go ahead.
Well, on the day that I received the news, I just happened to be walking past the desk in the front of my unit, and the red phone rang. And everybody who's been in knows when the red phone rings, 99% of the time, it's not good news. Most of the time, you're getting called to the lieutenant's office because somebody got in trouble or something happened to somebody in your family. And I never, ever answered that phone because I hated to have to go find somebody and tell them some bad news. Something just told me to pick it up that day. And they asked my reg number and told me to report to the lieutenant's office. So I kind of got in a panic a little bit because I'm an avid letter writer. And I was always writing someone, telling them about the conditions at the prison, and I just had happened to write a letter to this reporter. Like the week before, I said, oh my God, they got my letter. I am in big, big trouble because I was, telling this reporter everything that was going on. So my knees were just shaking. I could hardly even walk down the hill to get to the lieutenant's office. So when I walked in there, I walked in the lieutenant's office, and both of the officers who were there, they had this dumb look on their faces. And I'm looking dumb, and they're looking dumb, and they're looking at me and looking at my tag and making sure it was me. They said, you have to go to the warden's office. I said, oh God, I'm really in trouble now if they're sending me to the warden's office. So I walked in there, and she said, we're waiting on your unit team. I said, oh God, I know for sure I'm in trouble now because you get teamed or something when you get in trouble. So I sit there, I'm waiting. I said, oh God, the thought hit me. I said, oh God, I hope nothing happened to one of my kids. So I'm sitting there, and it seemed like it took them forever to get there. They walked in, my unit manager and my counselor. And my counselor had this big, gigantic grin on his face. And all of a sudden, it hit me. I said, oh my God, I got the clemency. And I felt like the whole room spinned out from under me. I knew I couldn't be in trouble because my counselor and I are real close, and I knew he wouldn't have been so excited and had that big smile on his face. So then they told me, and they said, well, the warden said, we've got to make a phone call. I thought they were calling President Obama. I said, oh my God, I'm gonna hit the floor. It felt like the floor and the ceiling had changed places. And I was just holding on to the chair, and they were calling the public defender's office. So I was like, okay, I can talk to them and not fall on the floor and have to get scooped up. But they told me, and it was so funny because they said, okay, well, you can call your family now. I couldn't remember not one phone number to save my life. So I had to make it all the way back up the hill to get my phone book to be able to call them. So it was really exciting, and it was so much fun because it seems like my news of getting my clemency gave everybody hope. And there was like this frenetic energy all over the compound. At the end of that day, when I laid down, I was so sore. from everybody squeezing me and hugging me. And it was really good.
Norman, how did you find out?
Mine was kind of similar to hers. I was going to the email, in which we email every day, and I was emailing my sister, because she normally sends me a good morning and how are you doing and have a good day and all these lovely things that I need. So my unit manager called me over the intercom, and that's not normal. And she was calling me kind of frantically. You know, report to my office now. I said, what's this about? So I go in her office and she's ranting off, you know, what have you done? You have a very important phone call coming at 11:30, it's 11:05. So she said, be back in my office prompt. And I'm like, oh, well, Miss Williams, what's going on? Nothing, I can't talk about it right now, you just come back to my office. So I go back to my room, and I said, well, I know I ain't done nothing. I got a application in. I haven't had a shot in 24 years, so what is this about?
A shot. What do you mean by a shot?
Incident report. Never being written up. Got a little nervous. I said, well, did I make my bed? What's going on here? So I got in, I got out. I didn't want to be graphic, but I tried to use the bathroom and I couldn't. So I said, okay, well, let me wait a minute here. So it got 11:25 and I'm on the way back to her office and she calls me again. I said, man, what is this? But I'm thinking again, being that I had all those deaths back to back, that this could have been another death.
Yes.
And I said, boy, if something happened to my sister or my daughter, I don't know if I can handle this one. So I got back in the office at about 11:29, the phone rang. And she said, hello, yes, he's sitting right here. So she said, well, would you like for me to put him on the speaker? And he said, no, I would like to speak directly to him. So I grabbed the phone, hands sweating. Don't too much normally make me nervous. So I said, hello? And he said, my attorney, David Ogden. And he said, hello, Norman, how you doing? I said, I'm not doing too good, Dave. He said, what's wrong? What's wrong? I said, I don't know. I need you to tell me. So he said, well, don't panic. I got some great news for you. I said, oh, yeah? I said, what's up? He said, well, I'd like to inform you that President Obama has accepted your clemency. I said, as frantic as I am, I'm saying, well, what does that mean? Because I done got so many denials that, I just can't believe that this is good. So he said, well, that means that you'll be going home. I said, going home when? Because I need some definite answers. So he said, November the 10th. I said, of what year? Why? So he said, of 2015. I said, of this year? So now I have Jessica Leanwine and Kelly Dunbar, who are two of my attorneys back there in the back.
Raise your hands, please.
And they in the background laughing. They said, are you okay? You're not saying anything. And I'm saying, yes, I think I am. But to have your life of never knowing if you're gonna go home, and then your life changes in 30 seconds.
Right.
How am I doing? I'm trying to process it.
Yeah, that's right.
So I processed it. I'm still processing it. I met with the president yesterday, and I'm still processing it.
Let's talk a little about life now. Rudolph, you said a little bit about it, but how's your reentry been?
Pretty much my reentry has been, it's been kind of Right, but it's been kind of fairly easily because, you know, I have a strong family support, you know, that has been leading me because my older sister, like I was saying, you know, she said, I'm gonna have to take you and walk you through the streets so you can be able to know, because everything is new to me. It wasn't no cell phones, and I carried a pager when I left the streets. And so, you know, like, then I got a beautiful fiance that's sitting right out there right now, and then she stays on top. Like all the adjustments I need to make because it's still a process with me because the fact is I'm not fully able to take, and the only thing I use the phone for is just to call somebody. I ain't on the Facebook and all this stuff. I just ain't used to that there, and I don't really know how to operate none of it yet. But my reentry, you know, has been beautiful, you know, because I came home, like I said, working. Then, you know, I didn't hold no resentments against, you know, society, my lawyers, or nobody, because I realized that, you know, I was the person that put myself in the situation that I was in. And so then, you know, it's like the one thing I did when I came home is I refused to wear that label that they give us, that I'm an ex-convict. And see, I know I'm not an ex-convict.
That's right,
So, you know, I'm just a brother that made a bad decision, and now I'm making the best of an opportunity, you know, like, of the opportunity that was given to me, which is my lawyer is here, Ms. Steinberg, which, you know, like, I truly, you know, like, I give them my heart because the fact is they was there for me, just as well as, you know, my public defender, because they the one that helped start this, just as well as my older sister. She had put in the application for the clemency. But, you know, my reentry, you know, I can say is pretty much easy because the one thing I did was I don't believe in failure. And so one thing I do is, you know, like I put my best foot forward and then I make the best of an opportunity that I do have for me. And that's what I do today. I make the best of an opportunity that I got before me right now. And, you know, I can successfully say that, you know, like that I'm headed the right way. The one thing I don't get caught up on is the material things that I used to value back when I was out in society.
Right.
I don't really need it. You can just give me a pair of thrift pants and a pair of boots and stuff, and I'd be satisfied with that. As long as I be able to provide a roof over me and my fiance's head, then that's all that matters to me. And then I can be able to have a solid relationship with my kids and my grandkids. Then, you know, like, but my reentry, you know, has been fairly easy because I've been meeting some beautiful people that have been helping me with my reentry.
Shauna?
My reentry, I would have to say, has been mixed blessings. I was lucky enough to still own my home. I still have my house. So I didn't have to worry about trying to find some place to live or anything. But I guess being removed from society for so long, it does something to you. It almost like handicaps you. Everything, like Rudolph said, has changed so much. Cars, you know, now I go and sit in my husband's car, there's not a key. I've tried to go sit in there to get warm. One day we were waiting for my daughter at a restaurant. I didn't even know how to turn the car on. I mean, just everything across the board has changed so dramatically. And it was a little traumatizing when I first got home, but I found something that was real therapeutic for me. I went right back to what I used to do, the community outreach work. And that's what I really, really love to do. I got involved with some organizations that are addressing some crime and safety issues, some anti-violence initiatives. We're in my city, it's still going through a real bad economic time, so we have a lot of slum, abandoned properties and houses, so we're repurposing a lot of those and trying to start some programming that'll help teach the guys the construction trades so that they can rebuild the houses and learn how to become journeyman carpenters and roofers and painters. So that really helped me readjust because it was what I really, really loved to do. So it helped me find my place again and get back started.
Ramona, you are still in a halfway house, is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Where are you going to live next?
Well, up until Friday, I thought I was going to live with my son.
And what happened?
They told me I couldn't be added to the lease because I'm an ex-felon, I'm a convict. So where I thought everything was already structured, once I leave Washington from having lunch with the president, I have to return back to Charlotte, and as of yet, I haven't gotten a job, so I have to create a plan of housing and employment, and I only have 2 weeks left in the halfway house, so I'm gonna have to fast forward. But I am so grateful for the experience of incarceration. It kept me determined, so I don't see this as an obstacle, just an opportunity.
Shauna, Ramona, and Norman, what advice would you give for people who are still incarcerated right now, who are hoping to get out soon?
The advice I would give them is to, if you find yourself in a situation where you have no control over your life anymore, it's time for inner reflection. And you have to look inside yourself and find out your true purpose. Sometimes if you are in the free world, your life is so busy you really never have time to stop and sit and think and reflect on things. In the situation we were in, you had a lot of time to do prayer and meditation and really search yourself inside out. So for the ones that are left, I would say focus on your inner self and find out what you really came to this planet to do.
Ramona, what would you say to people who are still incarcerated?
I will piggyback off of what she said, but also never give up. Never allow people to talk negative into your life. You have to believe in yourself. Positive affirmation will take you very far. Always believe that whatever your higher power is, get in tune with it. And always believe that something greater can come out of something bad.
Norman?
To piggyback off the both of them, and I still communicate with a lot of brothers in jail, and they always often ask me, man, how did you do it? I said, well, I kept myself in position to receive a blessing. It's always about positioning yourself. If you get in position for what you asked for, stay in position, and you just may get it. If you're out of position, you won't get it. So always work on putting yourself in position. If incarceration is supposed to be for correction, then be honest with yourself and make the corrections that you know you need in order to become the better man that you are. And that will put you in position to bring people in your life that would help you get free.
Rudolph, there are millions of people right now trying to reenter who are out of prison, formerly incarcerated. What would you say to them to help them to reenter successfully?
Well, I have to piggyback off what Norman just said, as far as, the one thing I would have them to do is be true to themselves and then accept the fact that, that you have to look at the inner person, like I heard Ms. Scott say, and then realize that, that you are the problem. And that in order for you to get this problem straightened out, then you have to realize that you have to face that problem. And the one thing that I realized that I had to do was look at that person that I seen in the mirror. And once I looked at that person that I seen in the mirror, then I didn't like what I seen back. But I knew that changes had to come about as far as me making these changes. And then the one thing I learned how to do when I was in there was de-institutionalize myself instead of institutionalize myself. Because, see, I could have came home and then probably said some crazy stuff to some of y'all in here, and then blaming y'all for me being incarcerated. But the fact is, it's like, like I hear about the staff members at the last place that I was at really loved me, and then because the fact is I realized they had a job to do, just like I had one to do. Mine was to do the time that they gave me. Mine wasn't taking to do that. So, it's about really being honest with yourself, like I heard Brother Norman say, and accepting the fact that that you can come out here and be whatever you want if you put your best foot forward.
So, In the very little time that we have left, some of you had a chance to talk to President Obama, some of you did not. But what did you say to President Obama, or what would you say to President Obama if you had the chance to speak to him? And I'll start with you, Shauna.
Well, if I had a chance to say something to him now, I'd want him to know that on the night of his election in '08, the building I was housed in had about 600 people in it. And when they announced that he'd won, there was such a roar, it was like the building shook. And I never felt that again since. That first election was just so electrifying. It was like everybody in the whole building was jumping up and down and screaming, and the building shook. And it came to my mind that I think I just read a book by James Baldwin, and there was a quote in there that said, it goes something like, when I thought all was lost, my dungeon shook, and my chains fell off. And I knew when that happened, and I thought of that quote, I knew he was going to be the fulfillment of so many of us getting out of there. And
Rudolph?
What I would have to say, I would have to thank that brother for the opportunity he has given me as far as giving me a second chance. Because I also took and wrote this brother a letter saying that, you know, that I was freed from the chains that I was bounded to, and that who the Son has set free is free indeed.
Norman?
I would like to tell, or to say to the Commander-in-Chief, as I said to him yesterday, thank you. You know, I like the way you flaunt your power. You know, it makes me feel good as a man. But, you know, you're only one person. You can't save the world, but just, Mr. President, you know, save who you can.
That's right.
Ramona, last word.
It was such an honor and privilege to still be in the custody of the BOP to have lunch with the president.
Yeah.
It took me a minute to just realize I was sitting next to him, the man that saw the need to commute a lot of people's sentences. He believed in us, and I thanked him for believing in me enough to go out and be a productive member of society. And I promised I would never let him down. He would never have to worry about his name being tainted for signing the paperwork for allowing me to be free.
Well, this has been an absolute honor for me, and I think we all owe you a standing round of applause.